Well, ladies and gentlemen, again, it's our great honor to invite back our distinguished speaker, Dr. Michael Patrick. Again, I say this many times. Every time when I have Dr. Patrick on the show, it's not all about the bad news. It's all about the good news. And hopefully that this time the conversation truly will enlighten all of you. Well, Mike, welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you, Will. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Well, again, Michael, it's fascinating to look at the Tuesday's primaries results. As I mentioned in the intro, two people, I want to say they were not surprised, but they were a bit surprised about the election results. Bill Cassidy, the senator from Louisiana, and Thomas Massie from Kentucky, they didn't get the results they wanted. As simply, they got the message very clear from President Trump. You're with me, you win. Without me, you lose. So, Michael, the question to you, especially look at the political base. Were you surprised about the message that with Trump, without Trump? So what is happening to the political party, especially from the Republican side? Your thoughts?
Well, one of the things that Donald Trump wrote a post earlier this week that was kind of a very strong post, and this is on other subjects really, but what it was clear is that he has no reservations about being crystal clear of what he means and what he says. And this is an attitude that the press really doesn't know how to handle it. He went after the press again in one of his Truth Social posts. And so if we're understanding elections and our filter is social media, I'm not sure we get a real clear picture of what's happening on the ground. The questions that the press could be asking that would help us to understand this dynamic from a political point of view within the United States particularly, they're not asking the questions. And so they're hyper-focused on whatever scraps in the information sphere that they can grab to build some kind of an artificial balance here of interests. And you can see this in, for example, the contrast between the polls that we're hearing about and what happened in the elections, in these elections. And the polls would indicate that Trump is losing power in the MAGA base, whereas the election itself would demonstrate the exact opposite. And so what that raises in my mind is the more you rely upon the traditional methods of getting your information from the mainstream media as your sole source, I think you can be misled. So yes, surprise becomes a pretty common response to, hey, how did this happen? And it wasn't because there was some secret mission or secret sauce. It was because the information did lack some integrity. If the information being provided had been trustworthy, this would not be a surprise election. As it is, it works against the Democrats even more. In some ways, it's self-defeating for their purposes because now it looks like a huge loss for them rather than an understanding. This is reflecting where people are at regarding Donald Trump and giving him a commission to accomplish a very difficult set of tasks. Whether you agree with that or not is not the point. It's the integrity of the information. Are we getting the stories we should be getting so that we're not surprised by these elections? But I think it has sent a clear message that, as you said, if you're not on the train, then you're off it. And this has had a profound effect in the changing of the political climate, I think, in the United States.
Michael, let's bring another political actor into our conversation. Former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. Of course, I mean, again, we know that Chris Christie has been one of the straightforward politicians in the States today, especially when we look at his temperament towards Donald Trump or his judgment towards the Trump administration. During the interview that he made very clear to all the Republican politicians or senators whatsoever, the message was clear. Stop pleasing Donald Trump. He won't like it, and we don't know whether he's going to favor you or not. Michael, from your perspective, at this moment, we know that political polarization, it's not going away anytime soon. I mean, if we trace back all the way to 2016, during the first term of Trump's presidency, this loyalty, this honor, and he was showered with all the blessings and praises and from across the continents. We know that Trump enjoys that. But right now, fast forward 2024, despite what we say or judge, or however the way we interpret Trump's political interests, he's still the same. I mean, again, it's about loyalty. It's about the temperament, about the personal relationships. So from your perspective, how do we assess the comments or the rhetoric from Chris Christie that regardless what you do, Trump, it's not going to like you because he doesn't even know how he's going to make a decision about a person or decision about a case? What do you say to that?
The physics of how American politics have functioned are changing somewhat. This is a new chemistry set going on, and this is a puzzle for a lot of people. I mean, I look at what's going on internationally, and this isn't being run by the same dynamics that governed international politics just a generation ago, really. And I'm seeing some of the same questions happening internationally regarding China and what we can expect from China. And that Xi Jinping has put a whole new chemistry at work in his country to do things differently. When he talked about, his 4 initiatives, he brought it up again a second time in this gathering. So I'm seeing that they're changing some fundamental dynamics for how things are going to operate. It's not going to be the same game anymore. That's got pluses and real minuses, particularly in the short term, for everybody who's trying to adapt. I mean, Donald Trump was, the question is he just a bull in the global, China shop tearing things up, or is he reinventing some things in how things are to operate? If we use the example of Donald Trump's approach to this summit, when he brought together a few dozen of the top businessmen in the world who came there into this has not been done before. And another initiative, he brought the defense secretary, which I don't think the last time a defense secretary went to a summit was like 1972 or 74, somewhere in there. I mean, he brought an entirely different approach. And they changed up the schedule some. So Trump introduced these people and made an effort to try and have a more full front team, and showing the dynamics are changing. This wasn't on the schedule. This was not, they weren't planning to do this, but Xi Jinping thought it was a pretty good idea by the time they had a chance to actually really interact in some ways. My only regret and disappointment was I was looking for more of the Chinese leaders who are really on the forefront of changing AI. I wanted to meet some of who those characters are. I know the American characters. I wanted to meet some more of and learn more about the Chinese characters. I suspect we could see something along those lines begin to happen, where China can say, hey, we're the ones leading a lot in AI, and we want to engage. This is all constructive stuff, but it's not necessarily planned in the same way that with the same expectations. Same as the same dynamic in the American political elections that just took place. These were unexpected findings. Yes, you hear me blaming the press for that in large measure, but it's also trying to get a grip on where is this going. Many of these, the people that lost were reasonably good conservatives by many of the traditional methods of measuring. But that didn't mean that they were on board with the kinds of new dynamics and new directions that Donald Trump was moving. And yeah, he is much like some of his counterparts in other parts of the world. You're either on the boat or you're off, and so we're seeing that kind of strength come forward. But it is a new game, and we have to kind of, if we're gonna look at the rule of the game, we got to take it as is and not just the way we think it should be.
Michael, since you brought up China, I want to jump into the foreign affairs topic. We know that last week, President Trump's to China was rather significant. Either we analyze it from the diplomatic way or we analyze it from the personal way. But before asking you the question, I want to share with you, this is what I take, and this is how I assess the entire visit.
Please, I was waiting to hear what you thought about this.
I have to say that this time, when President Trump came to China prior to the visit, he had a lot of anticipations and expectations. But when I look at the photo op, when I look at the two leaders stood together at the Temple of Heaven, just look at the body language. Again, remember when I was your student, you taught us specifically about how to assess the personality or the person, not based on the words, but based on the gesturation. So body language. Needless to say, Michael, I felt this time when President Trump walked away from the trip, he didn't really get what he wanted. But instead, he walked away with a message very clear regarding this territorial dispute between China and Taiwan. Now, you might ask the question, but why bother bring all the CEOs? Why bother bring all this, all the way that more than 14 people that stood in line shook hands with the Chinese President Xi Jinping? What was that for? Very simple. Again, I don't know Donald Trump in person. We haven't met each other in a face-to-face yet. But again, knowing his political interest, knowing his personality from the business background, this time was a good opportunity to show the world, and especially to show the CEOs that went along with President Trump, to say, it was me who made it happen. It was me who were able to set up the meeting for you to meet with the Chinese leader. So again, it was a good opportunity for PR for the White House, but it was not fruitful. It was not productive for President Trump when we talk about the global affairs. Because at some point, China was waiting for the opportunity to send the message, not through social media, not through the government transitions, but face-to-face, to say, when we talk about internal territorial dispute, it's not about other people, but it's about China alone, period. Turn off the radio, tune out the noises, let us to deal with the issue internally, and we do not want any outsider or any outside players to butt in our message. That's why as soon as the meeting was over, when President Trump jumped back on the Air Force One, I remember that he was asked by the press whether the topic of Taiwan was brought it up, whether President Trump agreed with Xi about Taiwan or any other related topics. If I remember clearly, as smart as he was, President Trump said, I could not comment on that. I am not going to answer that question, because he knew exactly anything that he said or would say can set the fire between the two relationships. So again, Michael, my take for President Trump is good opportunity, great PR, but I'm sorry that the dialogue and the conversation should be continued, perhaps not anytime soon, maybe later on in September, when the Chinese leader decided to visit the US, or even perhaps this is not the right timing to ask for China to help or support for any international affairs. And plus, let me add one more thing. Sitting US Secretary of the State, Marco Rubio, he had an interview with the domestic press, and he made this crystal clear. President Trump never asked for a favor from China regarding the war between US and Iran. Again, I'm not a political scientist. I don't believe that at all. I don't believe that at all. At this moment, perhaps for Marco Rubio or perhaps for someone within the Trump administration, lower the ego, be realistic. Let's talk about how China could actually play a role, not just about the war between US and Iran, but for this global economic stability. That's my take.
That's very interesting. I think there were some things that Trump walked away with. I mean, I'm just reading today about the agreement on airplane sales. I know there's some soybean deals, some of the collateral issues going on. But I think he's taking the conversation away from a strict diplomatic corps in the United States,
Right,
and putting it where the United States has some strength, and that is in the global corporate world, which is not to be ignored. It has a great deal of impact on everyone, and through them there may be some deals with China that are coming. But this was a couple days of meetings. There really wasn't going to be able to do all the lifting. I expect we'll see some interesting developments when President Xi comes to the United States. Now, the issue of Iran is very interesting as to what has taken place, because we saw as of yesterday, a great number of vessels were transiting the strait. There was, without the U.S. stopping some of this progress and movement taking place in terms of blocking. There were a number of deals, and as Iran begins to assert itself now somewhat successfully in controlling what used to be international waters. So we saw some real movement, some big vessels moving, one headed for China at least, probably more. A lot of the talk about two things: the denuclearization, to use one of the buzzwords used, that China seemed to agree. They agreed with based on what Donald Trump's report of it was, and so there were some efforts there to try and keep the peace talks going. But these ceasefire talks are not the full picture. What they didn't talk about was the fact that China is continuing to support Iran, and what does that look like in terms of weaponry or dual-use technology? What are some of the other things ongoing that didn't get talked about that need to get worked out at some point? So there's and what is the U.S. game plan? What is Trump really looking for? If he gets some kind of a nuclear deal, is that sufficient? Is he expecting that the Strait of Hormuz is going to open up a bit more fully? What do the Gulf states have to say about it? So there's still a lot in play, but I think we saw some motion taking place coming out of that summit, and it can be defined in the number of ships that suddenly started moving there that hadn't before. So there was some tacit agreement, at least, as to the next step, where China was encouraging some negotiations on the part of Tehran, but there's so much still left up in the air about all of that. What is Trump going to do next? China obviously agreed on some things. A lot of issues not yet resolved in this conflict, because as you saw, the Iranians were saying, well, you pull a stunt and you attack us, we've got some surprises for you. Some of those surprises are in the form of technology that is transferred and some new capabilities that the IRGC has. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays itself out. But I think this dialogue that's taking place with China did have some constructive outcomes, but they're not necessarily what everybody expected.
Michael, I do want to keep going with our question. Again, just go along with what you just said. let's talk about some of the short term and some of the long term goals. I mean, again, we look at the rhetoric, again, as I mentioned before, from the diplomatic way and also from this political way. So, Michael, from your perspective, two leaders met up. They had internal dialogues. Again, I believe today we really need more dialogues rather than monologue. I mean, again, so from your perspective, what are some of the short term, practical, tangible solutions or actions that you think will take place very soon, and some of the things that we just have to wait? I know you mentioned a little bit, but I do still want you to break it down little by little.
Well, when we look at the progress on the Iranian ceasefire, I think that's going to continue for a while. I don't think Trump is in a position to be able to launch the attack as loud and as fierce and as bombastic as he has been about this issue. I think as long as the movement continues in the Strait, I think he's going to continue to try and keep this ceasefire afloat. There are plenty of wild cards here. There are the Gulf states, and they're the ones who actually were pushing to keep Trump, at least ostensibly in the public story, keep Trump from pushing the button and going after this in a more forceful military way. But they still have their own issues. I mean, the attack on a nuclear facility in the Gulf was kind of a wake-up call here that that sort of behavior is going to have to be curbed, and maybe China will be a part of getting them to back off of those kind of stunts. We don't know, but I don't think this is off the shelf from something that he's not going to engage in. President Xi has his own goals for what happens in the Persian Gulf, and as evidenced by tankers being released to move towards China. So yes, there's backdoor ways of delivering oil. But one of the things Donald Trump didn't choose to do, that I think sometimes it's not what people say, it's what they're not saying. It's the misdirection or the distraction that takes place. So we have to listen to what wasn't said, what wasn't talked about. And there are plenty of ways for oil to move towards China without necessarily relying heavily on the Gulf. The question, in part, is what's going on behind the scenes in those kinds of situations to make the oil available. We heard about the natural gas deal that Russia was putting forward, ways to develop alternatives for China beyond just relying on the Persian Gulf. But it appears that if Iran has some role in governing the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, that maybe there'll be more movement there. We'll have to wait and see. So I think there's some real deals here that we haven't seen how that's what Trump is willing to accept, and also what keeps Xi moving on these issues. So.
Michael, two more questions before letting you go. Now, let's talk about, again, the idea or the actuality between U.S. and China at this moment. Not only we're seeing this economic competition, but also, let's put it in a more tangible way, energy, semiconductor, AI. Again, as you mentioned before, I was very surprised that this time, perhaps, again, we don't know what happened, closed doors, but we know that U.S. government and also the business leaders are very much interested, or were very much interested, in knowing more about this AI race. We'll look at this high tech, etc. But meanwhile, Michael, another piece of reality is U.S. has been placing strict rules, or again, I don't want to use the word sanctions, but closer attention to how China's dealing with new energy, semiconductor, AI, etc. So do you think now, after the summit between Xi and Trump, some of the areas or some of the aspects will be loosened up if so, perhaps that could be another way, or that could be a door to open bigger possibilities or further collaboration. What do you say to that?
I think the kind of era of sanctions governance as the way in which the American foreign policy moves forward, we're moving out of that role. Uh, and I think that it may have served some initial purpose, which I'm not going to even begin to try and articulate. But nonetheless, I think that there's now the basis of a relationship to begin to find a way forward for both China and the United States on these issues. That may sound very optimistic. And again, I'm not an optimist in the way I look at a lot of the game plan afoot. But at the same time, I think it's going to be a little bit, there's going to be other measures of this. The critical minerals issue is vital here for the United States, and Taiwan is vital for China. So where is the trade-offs in these two issues? And are there trade-offs? And first of all, it's hard to even talk about those issues without a great deal of offense arising. So, it used to be in the old days that was something the diplomats worked on. I'm not sure how that settles out, because Donald Trump does not have a large cadre of people that he relies upon. No offense to Marco Rubio, but I think that these conversations are going to be interesting to see how they work out. Many of them perhaps through the private sector, where these conversations will be taking place. But I think we're going to see the ground is now opened up, I think, for maybe some different ways of achieving the balance that Xi Jinping is looking for in his four initiatives. There may be some new ways of working through that develop with Donald Trump. Question really in the United States, and I wrap with this with saying my way too long explanation is that I think how the elections go in the United States are going to determine how much power he has. The U.S. Senate just voted on a procedural process which looks like putting some brakes on military action with Iran. And now that hasn't passed the Senate yet. It would not ultimately clear, because the president, of course, would veto it, and nobody has anywhere near 60 votes. So, but nonetheless, it's a signal that Congress, at least, in order to get Congress on board for foreign policy kinds of issues, there has to be some changes taking place, and perhaps some more attention on the home front for Donald Trump in the next 2 years. So it'll be interesting to see how they wrap up the Persian Gulf. But I don't think it and the Iran issue, I don't think it wraps up quite as neatly and cleanly as some people might imagine.
Michael, I want to ask you the last question again, based on my social circle, especially we'll look at this post-summit between President Trump and President Xi. In China, domestically speaking, people are still very concerned about this economic growth or economic projection. More and more entrepreneurs and more business owners are actively seeking ways to invest in the States, or perhaps in the worldwide. But again, they have to start somewhere. So I know that you used to work with a lot of international business owners and, consulting, offer consultation to them. Let me make the question very simple. Are we going to see wider, perhaps more opportunities for businessmen or business companies in both countries continue to invest in each other? So in other words, is there any way that for them to separate the politics from business, separate the politics from business growth, economic projection? Because at the end of the day, we still want to build positive and healthful relationships in business arena. So I want to hear your final thoughts. Do you think that there's a way that, talk about the manufacture and talk about this production line there's a way for both countries continue to work and collaborate, especially shift the attitude from the negative to positive from the U.S. perspective. Your final thoughts?
Well, the U.S. is going through significant changes. You started out in analyzing the politics of that, where the U.S. is really caught in some extreme kinds of divisions. I don't know that we're going to see the kind of coherence we need to really change all and solve all of the issues that are right now afoot, and that includes Europe. I mean, I live in Lithuania, and we had an emergency alert that blared through the villages over some drones that flying around. This last week there were several incidents. I think we've got a lot of issues out there that will help determine the whole business climate as to how secure things are. We have strong leaders, both of these gentlemen, speaking of President Xi and President Trump, strong dynamic personalities. They tend to have a very closed group of people that they rely upon. When I talked about wanting to know more about the Chinese AI leadership, I spotted a few people at the tables, Chinese leaders in AI at the tables, but we really didn't get the profile in the Western press anyway of who these people are and what they're doing. I think perhaps when the tables are turned and we have President Xi hosted in Washington, maybe we'll learn more. But those connections between those people may have, to the degree they're allowed, may develop some new alternatives, some new ways of building a constructive future that you're talking about. I don't expect it to happen from the two leaders getting together, but their ability to enable those conversations is really the question. And I can't, I'm a pragmatist, not an optimist, so I don't know where to put that. But other than to say that I think there was some reality checks available in this summit that took place for a couple of days. I think they both have a clear picture of what the other person's interests are. And so maybe some of it didn't need to be all prescribed in terms of looking for outcomes. Maybe there's a bigger picture of developing a relationship that is more clear-eyed about what each other is willing to look forward to. And then on that basis, you can begin to bring people together. But Trump was showing up with his team, saying, these are the people that I think can help us build something in the future. I know China's people were there. We just didn't get to know them as well. So I don't know if that's a positive or a negative. I think there's the wild cards like Iran and Ukraine are exactly that. They're wild cards. I was reading today of the 1,000 people a day that Russia says they're losing on the battlefield. I'm hearing reports all the time about how that may be coming closer to some kind of resolution. I'm not going to say a peace agreement. I will say some kind of a resolution. And so that's what I'm paying attention to because it's in my neighborhood. But nonetheless, the leaders have opened this summit, I think, gives us the opportunity for some relationship and some dialogue that's in a non-traditional sense a way forward.
Well, again, Michael, based on the media report that the invitation from the White House to China has already sent out regarding the state visit from President Xi to President Trump in the fall. And again, I believe the President Xi will be very delighted to visit the States. And hopefully when things are all settled and done and we're able to see those two wonderful leaders join together in this beautiful ballroom, and hopefully by then they'll be done, for the White House. And again, and then at the end of the day, it's still rather positive and fruitful to see how the two countries are able to work together. Well, again, ladies and gentlemen, it's such an honor to talk to Dr. Michael Patrick. And every time we talk to Michael, always bring fresh perspective and insightful analysis, not only about China, U.S., but also global affairs. So again, Michael, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. And hopefully next time when we talk, and we don't have to talk about politics, Let's talk about tea, let's talk about chocolate, and let's talk about something much more enjoyable rather than politics.